There is a moment every man knows, but almost no man talks about. The moment when the mind takes over and the body begins to follow it in the wrong direction. Not because anything is physically wrong, not because the body has failed, but because the brain, running at full speed, thinking too hard, analyzing too much, worrying about the outcome before the experience has even begun, sends a signal so loud and so disruptive that the body has no choice but to respond to it. This is not weakness. This is not a permanent condition. This is the predictable, scientifically documented result of what happens when the most powerful organ in the human body, the mind, turns against the very experience it was meant to support. Overthinking is not a personality flaw. It is a pattern. And like every pattern, once you understand exactly how it works, you already hold the key to changing it. Quick disclaimer, this is educational content based on research. If you have serious concerns, talk to a healthcare provider. To understand why overthinking has such a direct and measurable impact on ejaculation control, you first have to understand the relationship between the brain and the autonomic nervous system. The part of your body that handles everything you do not consciously control, including heart rate, breathing, digestion, and sexual response. This system operates in two distinct modes. The first is the parasympathetic state, which is the body's rest and restore mode, calm, open, receptive, and fully capable of sustaining a natural, relaxed sexual experience. The second is the sympathetic state, which is the body's fight or flight mode, activated by stress, fear, pressure, and yes, overthinking. When a man enters a sexual experience already inside his own head, already running mental commentary, already measuring and monitoring and anticipating and judging, the brain interprets that internal noise as a form of threat. It does not distinguish between the stress of a work deadline and the stress of performance anxiety. It responds the same way to both, by flooding the body with cortisol and adrenaline, by tightening the muscles, by accelerating the heart rate, and by shifting the entire nervous system into a state of high alert that is physiologically incompatible with prolonged relaxed sexual function. The result is not a failure of the body. The result is the body doing exactly what it was designed to do under perceived pressure, moving quickly, responding urgently, and prioritizing speed over sustainability. This is why the connection between mental overthinking and reduced ejaculation control is not a psychological mystery. It is a biological certainty. The man who lies in bed running a mental checklist, am I performing well enough? Am I lasting long enough? Does my partner notice? What happens if this goes wrong again? Is a man whose nervous system has already been hijacked by his own thoughts long before the physical experience has had a chance to develop naturally. What makes this particularly important to understand is that the body's response to overthinking is not a character flaw, and it is not a sign of weakness. It is, in fact, evidence of an extraordinarily sensitive and responsive nervous system doing its job with remarkable efficiency. The problem is not the system. The problem is the input. When the mind feeds the nervous system a constant stream of anxious, evaluative, outcome-focused thinking, the nervous system responds accordingly. And until that input changes, until the mental environment shifts from one of pressure and performance to one of presence and ease, the body will continue to respond to what the mind is telling it, every single time, without exception. Here is where the pattern becomes something far more complicated than a single moment of anxiety. and where so many men find themselves trapped in a cycle they cannot seem to escape, no matter how much they want to. The first time overthinking disrupts the experience, it registers in the brain as a significant event. The nervous system, which is wired to protect you from repeating painful or embarrassing situations, files that experience away with a level of importance that far exceeds its actual significance. And so the next time intimacy approaches, the brain does not arrive fresh and open. It arrives carrying the memory of what happened before. It arrives already scanning for signs that it might happen again. It arrives, in other words, already overthinking. And in doing so, it creates the exact neurological conditions that produce the very outcome it was trying to prevent. This is what health experts and neuroscientists refer to as the anxiety feedback loop, and it is one of the most self-sustaining psychological patterns the human mind is capable of generating. The cruel irony at the center of this loop is that the harder a man tries to control the outcome through mental effort, the more mental effort he expends. And the more mental effort he expends, the more activated his sympathetic nervous system becomes. And the more activated his sympathetic nervous system becomes, the less natural control he actually has. Trying harder in this specific context is not the solution. It is the accelerant. It takes what might have been a single isolated experience and transforms it through repetition and reinforcement into a deeply ingrained pattern that begins to feel like identity. Men who have been living inside this cycle for months or years often reach a point where they no longer remember what it felt like to approach intimacy without the weight of anticipation pressing down on them before a single moment has passed. They begin to avoid situations that might trigger the anxiety. They begin to construct elaborate mental strategies and techniques designed to distract or manage or override the very thinking that is causing the problem, not understanding that every new strategy is itself another form of overthinking, another signal to the nervous system that there is something here worth being anxious about. The suspense of this cycle is not dramatic. It is quiet and accumulative, building pressure the way water builds behind a dam, invisibly, steadily, and with a force that eventually becomes impossible to ignore. Understanding that this loop exists, that it is predictable, that it follows a specific psychological architecture, is not a small thing. It is, for most men who finally see it clearly, the first genuine moment of relief they have felt in a very long time. The path out of this cycle does not begin with a new technique, a new strategy, or a new mental framework designed to force the body into compliance. It begins with something far simpler and far more powerful than any of those things. It begins with understanding that the goal is not control, but the absence of the need to control. The men who experience the most natural, sustained improvement in their ejaculation endurance are not the men who found a better way to manage their anxiety during intimacy. They are the men who learn to create the internal conditions in which anxiety has nothing to feed on. And the primary tool for creating those conditions is something the ancient philosophers, the modern neuroscientists, and every credible health expert working in this field all agree on: the deliberate practiced cultivation of present moment awareness. When the mind is fully present in the physical sensations of the current moment, it cannot simultaneously be running the evaluative commentary that activates the stress response. Presence and performance anxiety cannot occupy the same mental space at the same time. This is not a motivational concept. This is neurological fact. The practice of diaphragmatic breathing, Slow, deep, deliberate breaths that originate in the belly rather than the chest is one of the most clinically validated tools available for shifting the nervous system from sympathetic activation back into parasympathetic calm. 3 slow breaths taken consciously before and during intimacy send a direct signal to the vagus nerve, which communicates immediately with the brain's threat detection center and begins the process of reducing cortisol and adrenaline in the bloodstream. The body, receiving this signal, begins to relax. The muscles release their tension. The urgency softens, and the natural capacity for sustained, relaxed experience that was always there, that was never broken, only interrupted, begins to reassert itself. Beyond breathing, the practice of sensory focus, deliberately directing attention to physical sensation rather than mental outcome, gradually rewires the brain's association between intimacy and threat, replacing it with an association between intimacy and safety. This rewiring does not happen in a single session. It happens through consistent, patient, compassionate repetition. It happens when a man decides again and again to return his attention to the present moment rather than the feared future. And over time, with that practice, the feedback loop that once felt permanent begins to loosen, to quiet, and eventually to dissolve entirely, leaving behind a natural confidence that no mental strategy could ever have manufactured. The mind that once worked against the body learns at last to work with it. If you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notifications so you can see our new videos early.